Every murder town is unique, every story terrifying. Tonight, we visit a town which rewrote the rulebook on murder.
There was real shock. She would have been the youngest double murderer the country's ever seen.
Where violence went to new levels of depravity.
She had her hair burnt, she had a cheese grater used on her face. Did I really believe that 15 years of age, she could have been responsible for her father's death?
And where a killer left a town living in fear.
I think he meant to kill her. You don't take a knife to somebody and think, oh, that's going to be all right. He's just pure evil.
Ipswich is tonight's murder town. Some killers attack complete strangers. Some target the vulnerable, the young, or the elderly. And some prey on people that they know. There are killers who are inspired by money or by revenge, by sexual deviancy, by hatred. There are opportunists and there are meticulous planners. But what unites these men and women is one simple trait, and it's the most terrifying thing of all. They live amongst us. In our towns, on our streets, in our houses. They're just like the rest of us, but capable of evil. And they could be anywhere. Welcome to Murdertown.
Do you feel it in the air? Oh. Something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes. And something wicked this way comes. Something wicked this way comes.
Tonight's episode explores a number of violent murders that plunged Ipswich into one of its darkest periods. Ipswich is the county town of Suffolk, a former market town with a faded glory. It was once the most important dock town in the UK. It's home to more than 100,000 people, and it draws in millions of tourists every year. But it also has a dark side.
I've seen things that, you know, I wish I could unsee. I've seen women beaten to a pulp, I've seen men beaten to a pulp, I've seen people being stabbed. You know, I've seen a lot of things.
In 2011, Carrie had no idea that she was about to be embroiled in a devastating sequence of events. She was in town on her way to meet her friend, Allison Stud, and a man nicknamed Shortman.
It was only about 5 o'clock in the evening, and I'm walking along. Got to the Odeon, where sort of everyone used to sort of hang out. So I come up these steps. I see a few of my friends sat here and spoke to Allison. Stood talking to Allison. Shortman come from the corner because I hadn't seen him. And he came up to me and he's like, babe, will you come round the corner with me? And I sort of, in a not so polite way, said no. With that, I actually turned my back and I walked down the steps and I felt someone, what I thought was punch me in the back. So I've turned around and, Shortman, and stood there. And I was like, what's that for? And asked him why he'd punched me. And then he continued to do it a few more times. It took a second or two for it to register. A friend of mine who was sat up at the Odeon, he said, Carrie, run. He's like, he's not punching you, he's stabbing you.
Carrie had been repeatedly knifed and was bleeding heavily.
I had so much running through my head. I was scared, I didn't know what was going on, I didn't know why he had done it. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. I knew I had to get away. I ran past a few shops. I don't know why, but Argos just seemed the obvious shop to go to. So that's where I came to. Told them that I thought I'd been stabbed. I was like, can you call me an ambulance? I think I've been stabbed. And at the time, I didn't actually realise how bad it was. A lady came up from behind me and told me not to worry because she was a fully qualified, went to say first aider, but she didn't finish her sentence, and I looked at her. When I looked at her face, that's when I realised it was serious. And then because you start panicking, your heart starts rushing, my heart starts rushing, and I can feel my jumper getting warmer and warmer, and it was the blood. I was just soaked in blood.
Police and ambulance rushed to the scene. Carrie was taken into hospital and admitted for emergency surgery. She'd suffered numerous wounds to her back and arm.
If you stab somebody 5 times, you're not going to stop, because he wasn't going anywhere. He was staying in the same position. I ran from him. It's not like he quickly stabbed me and then ran away. He'd have continued, and I'd have been dead.
But she wasn't the only admission to A&E. Unbeknown to Carrie, later that day, her friend Allison was also attacked.
I could hear in the room next door, they were, saying about a lady having a cardiac arrest. But I knew that, you can hear things. I knew this lady had died. And then the following morning, because a friend of mine come up and told me that, Shortman had stabbed Ali and killed her.
Allison Stud was dead, and her friend Carrie was in intensive care, all at the hands of someone known as Shortman. But the clues as to what had really gone on and who was behind it lay in the town of Ipswich itself. All over the country, there are towns which have witnessed shocking murders. But there are some in which murder has made its name and become synonymous. And one of those is Ipswich.
The wider county of Suffolk is very rural. Ipswich, it's the most densely populated town in the county, and it's largely a working class town as well. I grew up around here. Journalism seemed like the perfect career for me.
Tom is now the newspaper's crime correspondent.
I mean, Ipswich is not short of crime like any industrial town, but murders and homicides are particularly rare in the wider county, but they do happen.
I always have, really good memories of Ipswich. My dad used to take me all over the place, down the docks and to the old swimming baths. But ever since being young, I always remember the street drinkers. Always. There's always been a big problem with homelessness and drink.
The people that live on the streets of Ipswich are unpredictable. You put drugs and alcohol together in the mix, and mental health, it's a recipe for for violence and murder.
In 2009, my husband died, and my life just spiralled out of control. I'd had an on and off habit with heroin and crack for a lot of years. And unfortunately, I probably was in a circle that most people don't like.
Problems in Ipswich often arise in small pockets of the town on 3 housing estates.
They put a lot of people that come out of prison in there, a lot of people that have addiction, you know, so it's quite a lot of vulnerable people live there.
From these estates and some of the surrounding areas has emerged a group who live on the streets.
There is a community of what are called street drinkers. They're a marginalised pocket of society, if you will, and they are perhaps known for more petty crime and internal violence and retribution amongst their own group.
It doesn't take a lot to, you know, to trigger off an argument when you've got a lot of people with various addictions.
The street drinking culture is totally unpredictable. And you take drugs, you take alcohol, you mix them. You know, it can turn people into very violent individuals.
Brian Tobin has set up a charity to help some of these street dwellers to get back on their feet.
We were the main organisation in the town centre working with these individuals. So you get to know most, if not all, the street drinkers and the drug addicts and the homeless people over the years.
But back in 2009, his world and the entire street drinking community of Ipswich would be turned upside down with news of a grim discovery.
We received a phone call to ask why an area of Ipswich, a neighbourhood, was cordoned off, what was with the police presence there. First port of call, really, is to go out and find out for ourselves.
The call came from residents of Victoria Street in the west part of the town.
I arrived as soon as I possibly could and walked around to see that this property and the entire block of flats was cordoned off. There was a police officer stationed on the door and forensics officers here as well. My immediate thought was it must be the scene of a serious crime. We were able to get a first name at the scene of the person who was in that flat, and later on that day we were able to establish their full identity.
The victim was Rosalyn Hunt, a well-known member of the town's street drinking community.
So Rosalyn Hunt was a local lady to Ipswich. She was divorced from her husband and had 2 children. She had struggled to find work through most of her adult life, and her marriage ended up breaking down, and alcohol abuse seems to have been a fairly constant feature in the background of probably that breakdown.
Rick Munns was the detective brought in to investigate her sudden death.
Rosalyn's body was found lying clothed but on a mattress in the bedroom with a duvet covering the lower part of her body. She'd been dead, it was estimated, probably three, maybe 4 days. So there was some decomposition of the body that had set in. Massive injuries to her upper torso, with 9 separate rib injuries being broken. The pathologist gave a formal cause of death as blunt trauma. She clearly had suffered significant violence and physical abuse.
News of Rosalyn's death quickly spread.
My first job is to start knocking doors, to speak to neighbours, ask them what they know, what I could establish. Everyone thought very fondly of her and wanted, like us, to know what had happened.
It doesn't matter who you are, what circles you move in. You hear of someone being murdered, it's shock. And especially when it's somebody like, like Rosie, a really nice person, wouldn't harm anybody, wouldn't argue with anybody, somebody that's not confrontational.
But just as the town was reeling from the discovery of Rosalyn's body, there was more. Just 2 miles away, another body had been found in a flat here in Limerick Close.
One murder in Ipswich is unusual. For there to be a second discovery within such close succession the following day is particularly unusual. We had a double murder on our hands.
And the victim was quickly identified. Des Thorp, a father of 4, one of 11 children, who was known to be another member of the street drinking community.
Des was a chronic alcoholic. I met him on a handful of occasions, used to give him a cigarette or have a chat with him. He was a likeable enough guy. I think he was more harmful to himself than anyone else. In terms of street drinking hierarchy, he was near the bottom. He was easily very vulnerable and very apt at being bullied, if you like, by others on the streets.
As is quite common in the street drinking community, he would sofa surf and sometimes even sleep rough.
We quickly identified that outside of the premises there was a cushion that had both blood on it and would appear to have come from within the flat and probably the settee where Des actually was found. There were a number of marks on the inside of Des's lips that would suggest that the inside of his lips had come into some forceful contact with his teeth. And that obviously supported the potential that the cushion may well have been used over his face to smother him.
There were also signs that he had been badly beaten, and I think they even discovered a trainer print on his forehead. I think naturally there is concern when 2 bodies are discovered within such quick succession that there could be a serial killer.
Ipswich has a history of being home to serial killers. In 2006, 5 prostitutes were killed here in just 2 months. All of them were found naked and placed in sites around the town. A major investigation eventually led to the arrest of Steve Wright, and he was jailed and told he'd never be released. But it was in 2009 that police in Suffolk began to wonder if another killer might be targeting vulnerable sections of society. They'd found the bodies of 2 street drinkers just days apart in 2 properties in the town, and people there were fearing the worst.
The horrific nature of the deaths of Des and Rosalyn were particularly disturbing, and I think that resonated around the town.
In the close community, there was definitely shock. Significant question in those very early hours was I confident enough to be able to link the 2 offences? We looked to get people who knew the deceased and that group to talk to us and give us as much evidence as possible.
We gradually learned more and more about Rosalyn. It became more apparent that she was extremely vulnerable. She was perhaps being taken advantage of by the wider community of street drinkers, particularly 1 or 2 of those. She was fortunate enough to have acquired her own council flat, and other members of the street drinking community congregate there.
It became very clear that Des was an integral part of that same group. It was known that he certainly had been staying at her flat at various times.
There was a hierarchy within that community, exerting rule through violence amongst that group.
It seemed this hierarchy could explain what had happened.
The local community and neighbours were speaking to us, and the name of Paul Clark came up as part of that group that had potentially been violent towards Rosalyn, to Rosie Hunt.
I first came into contact with Paul Clark in 2008. You could sense aggression. You could see he was always the leader, if you like. And what I know of Paul, I think he would have led by fear, intimidation and violence. He's a very dangerous individual. And I always thought that in 2008 when I met him.
Investigators also scoured the flat where Des Thorp had been found to see who might be linked to that address. And they quickly learned that a number of people had been there when he died or shortly afterwards. One of them was a familiar face, Paul Clark, and there was another person apparently present too, Des's 15-year-old daughter, Lorraine Thorp.
Notably, Lorraine Thorp and Paul Clark had left the premises before police arrived, which clearly was very much suspicious in itself to us.
Paul Clark was a firm suspect, but the presence of Des's own daughter confused matters. Did she know her father was dead? Was Paul Clark taking her against her will? Or could it even be that she was somehow involved? In 2009, police in Suffolk were investigating the discovery of two bodies, Rosalyn Hunt and Des Thorp, had both been found in separate flats in Ipswich. They knew each other and they were part of the street drinking community. Now police were learning that other members of that community had often used the same flats. Now, two of those were Paul Clark and Des's own daughter, Lorraine Thorp.
Desmond Thorpe and his wife split up when Lorraine was probably about 12 years of age. She certainly moved more towards spending the majority of her time with her father.
Lorraine was never given the opportunity to have a childhood. She became Des's carer at a very, very young age.
It seems that through her father, Lorraine Thorpe became introduced to the street drinking community and therefore would have been introduced to Paul Clark.
For someone who'd not had any real care and love in her life, the first person that showed her some interest and some care, and especially someone like Paul Clark, who, as we know, was quite high up, if not the highest up in the hierarchy of street drinkers, she probably enjoyed it.
One witness reported having a conversation with Lorraine, saying that her and Paul Clark had physically frog-marched Rosalyn across to Paul Clark's flat at Mountbatten Court, and it appears that she was then held in his flat as a hostage for certainly probably 2 days. From Lorraine's own mouth, she confirmed exactly what was taking place.
We know that Rosalyn was particularly vulnerable and she wouldn't have been able to put up a great deal of fight. She was beaten badly over a number of days.
Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, but in keeping with their normal lifestyle, whilst Rosalyn was clearly at the flat and being subject to repeated beatings, there continued to be a number of people that visited the premises, and those people gave quite detailed statements as to some of the assaults that were taking place regularly, almost as if Clark and Lorraine were bragging or showing people what they'd done and what they were capable of. She was assaulted by certainly Clark and Thorp and possibly others in relation to the use of a dog chain on her. She had a cheese grater put to her face and used on her face. She had her hair burnt. She was at one stage threatened with an electric fan which didn't have any guard on it, so clearly she would have thought that was going to cause a very serious injury. And she was also at one stage even forced to get into a suitcase, and one can only imagine what the thoughts were in her mind as she knew this was happening and whether or not she was ever going to get out of the flat at all. At some stage, after a couple of days, she was taken back, almost certainly in the hours of darkness, to her own flat. And pretty much was constantly in the company of either Clark and Thorp, because clearly they didn't want her left on her own. And whilst here, she would have then suffered further ongoing assaults, and finally the fatal assault that we believe happened around about the 5th or maybe 6th of July.
Police were satisfied that Clark and Lorraine Thorp were responsible. But what about the murder of Des Thorp, Lorraine's own father? Had they gone on to kill him too?
Did I really believe that Lorraine Thorp, at 15 years of age, could have been responsible or partly responsible for her father's death? Des Thorp may well have been present when Rosalyn was fatally injured. It was known that he was going to approach the authorities or tell the authorities as to what had happened to Rosalyn. We believe that that was the main motivation why they ultimately couldn't allow Des Thorp to make that approach to the authorities, and would have led to his death by suffocation.
Within just a few days, 15-year-old Lorraine Thorp, perhaps influenced by the older Paul Clark, had tortured one woman to death and then suffocated her own father. Police charged them with both murders. But they knew that Rosalyn had been assaulted by others too.
We know from the evidence that we obtained from witnesses that the group in and around Rosalyn's flat would have consisted obviously of Rosalyn, Paul Clark, Lorraine Thorp, Des Thorp, Lorraine's father, very often a man called John Grimwood, who was part of the group. He was certainly present in and around the two addresses and at varying times over the days running up to when we believe Rosalyn was killed, and some of the witnesses certainly gave evidence of him committing physical assaults against Rosalyn at that time.
There was no doubt that Grimwood had been present for the beatings, so he stood trial too. But it was Lorraine Thorp, because of her age, who took the headlines.
If Lorraine Thorp was responsible for these killings, she would have been the youngest double murderer the country's ever seen. So there was real shock that somebody so young could have carried out such a brutal crime.
It's just very, very difficult to understand and think where she was as a 15-year-old, that she thought that that violence was in any way appropriate or normal or right.
The reaction from everybody was one of disgust.
The trio stood trial at Ipswich Crown Court. Thorp and Clark were found guilty of both murders and jailed for life. Clark was told he'd serve at least 27 years and Thorp 14 years. But remarkably, John Grimwood was cleared. So while two of Ipswich's most dangerous offenders began their prison sentences, John Grimwood was released back into the town. And Ipswich is a town that's seen killers on the streets before. Terry Abbott was told he'd served 16 years after setting fire to his ex-wife in 2001. They'd had an acrimonious breakup, and Abbott was described as being in a rage before he committed the violent attack. But it's rare for someone to have been accused of murder to be back on the streets and in the clear. John Grimwood was that man. But what would he make of his unexpected freedom?
Grimwood very quickly drifts back into that street drinking, drug using community of Ipswich, which is a small number of people. It's no more than 20 or 30, and we find him on the streets regularly. He's a completely free man.
I met John through Allison Stud, who was his girlfriend. I think she sort of felt like he was a good catch. Back in the day, Allison was an absolutely stunning woman. But obviously alcohol and drugs got hold of her, and he was a bit younger, you know. He was quite sort of, he had quite a muscly physique, you know, and so she didn't want to lose him. I thought he was all right. Wasn't somebody that I, you know, was going to go out of my way to befriend or anything, but I saw a lot of him.
John Grimwood was a local man again to Ipswich, and his family, or extended family, was still resident in and around Ipswich. He appears during the course of his life to have become dependent on alcohol and other controlled substances, drugs, and so went into that sort of spiral of a chaotic lifestyle.
His reputation was thus that people were certainly scared of him, and if I saw him in the town, I would take a few steps back if I had to, because you could sense that there was an undercurrent of violence in that person. It made you very, very wary.
Grimwood had several nicknames, including Shortman. And his reputation as a possible killer was one that he wasn't shying away from. Despite being cleared of murder, he was boasting about his knowledge of the previous crimes.
Everybody on the street knew that John had played quite a significant part in her murder. You've taken a woman and done what you've done, and you think that people are going to be impressed by it. Nobody deserves that. People don't want to hear it. And you certainly don't go around bragging about it.
Mr. Grimwood himself has numerous previous convictions, has always come into contact with the police, either via the drugs, the alcohol, carrying knives. Would have thought perhaps that after being incarcerated for a period of time, he'd have the opportunity to perhaps turn over a new leaf and become a more a positive member of the community.
Allison often turned up with black eyes, split lips. He was extremely violent to her, extremely violent. But she kept going back. If you're a woman, you're not going to say anything because you're not going to know what's coming next.
It was the end of January. Carrie was with friends near the Odeon cinema. John Grimwood then approached her and slashed her several times and then made off.
He knew from the second that he spoke to me that he was going to stab me. He knew that. Who in their right mind goes and stabs somebody at 5 o'clock when the town is busy and thinks they're going to get away with it? Yeah, he would have killed. He would have killed me because he doesn't have a conscience, so it wouldn't have bothered him. But obviously, I was the lucky one. I'm still here.
In 2009, Carrie Tolbert had just been repeatedly stabbed in broad daylight by John Grimwood. While she was lying in hospital, John was lying low.
There was police all over town, so John would have looked for somewhere to go, and they actually ended up at a friend of mine's. Once again, somebody that people can take advantage of.
2 hours later, more calls came in reporting another attack.
It's a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. It's a very narrow terraced group of houses. Within the house, there are 4 people. There is a dog in there as well. It's a confused scene.
Ali stood in the kitchen and John crawled on his arm, like an action man crawl, from the living room to the kitchen and cut her like below or just above the knee. You've got a main artery that runs down there.
She's lost a lot of blood. The other female in the house had called 999, had tried to perform CPR on Allison at the time before the paramedics arrived. So you can imagine the picture that the officers were faced with.
Allison was rushed to hospital, but despite the efforts of paramedics, she couldn't be saved.
I knew her before the drugs, I knew her before the drink. Drugs and alcohol change people, but Allison had such a brilliant side to her. Street people decided to, offer any information that they could because they wanted justice for her.
First 24 hours is a major, in any case, really key to get the best evidence you can as to why there's been an argument that night and why Allison has unfortunately lost her life.
It's sad but true, right? It would have been over alcohol, drugs or money. She was so in love with him, and no matter how many times he sort of hit her or how many times he'd done whatever he'd done, she believed he loved her.
He showed no real emotion when informed that Allison Stud, his partner at the time, has lost her life.
John's somebody that wouldn't care. It wouldn't bother him. He wouldn't sit there thinking, oh my God, what have I done? He'd be proud of it, like it's an achievement. And that's John.
He's used to how police investigations work. He gives a prepared statement which basically says, wasn't me, I wasn't responsible, and then goes no comment to other questions posed of him throughout a 2-3 hour interview.
I think he meant to kill her. You don't take a knife to somebody and think, oh, that's going to be all right. You're intending to do them serious damage or kill them.
We're fortunate that a witness in the street saw a male matching loosely Grimwood's description standing by a bin in Witherpole Street, and then 24 hours later there is a knife found at that location, which is obviously seized by police and sent away for forensic examination. On the tip of the knife was found to have the blood of Allison Stud on it. In a very small proportion, it was also found to have the blood of Carrie on it. There were some other people with Carrie who also proved to be really helpful witnesses, which helped us prove that it was Grimwood who was using the knife against Carrie. 2 hours before, he'd used a knife against Allison Stud.
John Grimwood was charged and found guilty of murdering Allison Stud and wounding Carrie Tolbert with intent. He was jailed for a minimum of 20 years. But the town of Ipswich wondered why a man accused of murder once could be allowed to attack more.
Nobody could understand why he ever got released. I still have nightmares about John. He is just pure evil.
Grimwood's sentence marked the end of a 12-month crime wave, which saw 3 of Ipswich's street drinkers killed. A community ravaged by drink and drugs had now been decimated.
I think over the years, the people of Ipswich are aware of the gaps between rich and poor. And I think there is a sense of, similar to probably the rest of the UK, they're over there. They're on the borderline of society. They're the sort of marginalised people. And it is sad, because I've witnessed it on many occasions.
If you pass a group of street drinkers, you perhaps don't consider that these people have lives, and it's only until you learn about the victims, and in the case of Rosalyn Hunt, she had a family, she had a past. It's only when you really learn their personal stories that you realise just how tragic they are.
They are all such vulnerable people. People that wouldn't put up a fight.
It doesn't matter what part of society or which community you come from, when you get to serious crimes such as murder, each case will be investigated thoroughly, and we, certainly in Suffolk and I'm sure across the country, will do everything we possibly can to bring those responsible to justice.
I've got no doubt murders will occur again. When you've got the toxic 3 of drugs, alcohol and mental health, there's always that propensity and potential for violence. And sadly, more murders will occur on the streets.
It's rare for an entire community to come under attack, and rarer still for the attacker to be one of its own. But in this town, it was 3 drinkers, including a 15-year-old girl who had blood on their hands. They preyed on vulnerable people and attacked their own loved ones with no clear motive. Here in Ipswich, people are unlikely ever to forget.